Hello and welcome here to another guide scripted by Basharuk covering everything you need to know about how to be an effective roaming support. This is otherwise referred to as the position 4 support role. So first off, a little bit of history. Roaming in Dota is a style that has become so popular in the past couple of years that it has actually become a stable and recognized role. In this guide we're going to talk about what roaming is, what its benefits are, and how you can understand the role and get better at it. Back in the ancient times of Dota 2, people used to play around with tri-lanes all the time. It was a popular thing to have two laning supports who just farm pulls and protect their hard carry. It was pretty strong to play that way, but it was also very, very predictable. People figured out that instead of having two static supports that can't really do anything but sit on their lane and occasionally smoke together, you can have one lane support to take care of the lane, and one support to be off the map, moving around and creating chaos, keeping the enemy team guessing where he could go next. This is what roaming essentially is, playing a hero that can pressure lanes by staying in the fog of war, providing kill potential on whatever lane he decides to visit, or simply being able to harass the enemy player out of the lane. Roaming is very much a role about understanding the laning phase and how you can have a big impact on it. You need to identify which lanes are going to be weak and strong from both sides, and in a way you want to think of a game plan ahead of time of which lanes you want to pressure the most. You should always look at the draft of both teams and kind of picture in your mind how you think the lanes are going to shape up. Now it all depends on the heroes in the game and what you are playing, but generally you want to be moving between two lanes throughout the early stages of the game. Honestly, the best way to understand the laning stage better is to play all kinds of roles. If you play a few mid-laner games, you're going to know how and when you can gank the laner if she's on the enemy team, and how you can help her during the laning stage if she is on your team. Based on that, it's kind of hard to tell and hard to give general rules as to where you should be, because every game is going to be different. There are always some things, however, that you're going to want to prioritize. First off, your highest priority should always be to secure the lane for your position 1. Whether that is an anti-mage safe lane or a Shadow Fiend mid lane, you want to help those heroes have a good laning stage so that they can carry the game later on. If your carry player is having a bad matchup on his lane, something like a Slack against a Nature's Prophet, and the laning support is not a good hero to help deal with him, it should be your highest priority to help win that lane so that your Slack can get good timings on his items. If you don't really have any of these set in stone priorities and all of your lanes are going to be fine wherever you go, you should probably be looking most for a lane where you can get a kill. Mentioning helping out your own greedy cores if they need it, the enemy team might also have these same greedy cores in their lineup. When the enemy team has these weak core heroes in the early game, you should instantly put the red dot on their heads and start trying to make their life a living nightmare. If the enemy team has an invoker mid and your safe lane isn't feeling any pressure, it is your job to crush that invoker's soul. Even if the enemy mid is not as weak as an invoker, if you have a strong laner on your own side, it is also a good idea just to go there and make the lane even harder for the enemy player. Think of it this way, if there is a really balanced matchup on the mid, for example something like a Puck versus Shadow Fiend, if you go there for 1 minute, throw some spells, deny some creeps, or just harass the enemy mid, that will tip the balance in the matchup and it will instantly become favoured for your team for the cost of you being there for only a minute. Something to remember is that with roaming, you don't necessarily need to get a kill on the lane to give your teammates a significant advantage. You can easily ruin an enemy mid's life just by harassing him, throwing some spells, and then staying in the fog of war. Heroes like Puck and Queen of Pain are almost impossible to kill when you roam mid, but that doesn't mean that you can't pressure them really hard. These two heroes in particular are generally really squishy early on, and if they're taking hits from you as well as your mid laner, they're going to need to back off. Every hero also has some patterns and weaknesses that you can exploit during the laning stage. For example, Queen of Pain typically goes for Shadow Strike at level 1, which leaves her without a blink for the first wave or two. You can literally go up on her, zone her out, harass her out of the lane, and just punish her for going for that spell. A hero like Razor is always going to be draining your teammates' damage by running at him all the way until he reaches the tower. While this can be a really strong play for the Razor, and it is part of what makes him so good on the lane, it also puts him out of position and makes him move in a very predictable way that you can exploit. If your mid hero has some sort of nuke ability, which most of them do, and you are ready for whenever Razor starts running towards your teammate, you can jump on him really easily and either kill him or harass him out of the lane. In general, just try thinking of things that people typically do on the lanes with their heroes and how you can use that to your advantage. Most heroes tend to do the same thing almost every game, so if you find a pattern that you can exploit, it's going to make your roaming a lot more effective. Some things to note about harassing is to always be aware of the enemy creep wave, and you never want to overextend or do a trade that is going to end up in you having to run back to fountain. When you are going to the enemy hero and want to hit them, always try to avoid being around the creep wave at all, because they will instantly aggro you, and that hit trade suddenly becomes really sketchy. Sometimes the creeps even end up blocking you, and you might straight up die and lose the lane for your teammate, which is never something you want to have happen. The other thing is that you really want to know how tanky your hero is, and how much damage the enemy hero you are trying to harass can do as well. You don't really want to harass an enemy Viper that has bonus damage from a Drow aura. After a few hits from that, you're going to be questioning your life decisions. Usually as a support, if you come out from a trade even or even slightly lower than the enemy core, it's fine. You also want to try and be aware that the enemy team is most likely going to have a roamer of their own. It becomes a really interesting game of which lanes both position 4 players are going to be pressuring, and since most of the time people roam between a side lane and the mid lane becomes heavily contested. You always want to keep an eye on the enemy roamer and where he is probably heading. If he has a strong safe lane that doesn't need him, he is probably going to be pressuring the mid heavily. Knowing that, if you are free on the map, you can stay mid and try to counter gank, or if you are busy with your own safe lane because of a bad matchup for your carry, you want to at least tell your mid laner to be careful. Sometimes the enemy team is going to have a better matchup on just about every lane, and you aren't going to be able to help everyone. That is why people really like picking strong offlaners, so that they can bring the supports' attention to that lane, and as a result, the supports are not going to be able to move around effectively. So instead of playing tunnel vision mode and just looking at which lanes you are going to be pressuring, think of what the enemy roamer's goals are going to be and how he is going to move based on his team's laning stage. When you roam on most heroes, you typically want to start off with boots or at least a windlace to help you move between lanes, and those items will also help you catch that out of position hero on the map. Heroes that like having early movement speed are Earthshaker, Nightstalker, or Kunkka. On heroes that can easily reach enemies and land physical hits on them, you want to go for an Orb of Venom so that you can end up landing a lot more hits than you otherwise would, for example on heroes like Earth Spirit, Riki, Bounty Hunter, or Tusk. The way you roam is basically going to be staying in the trees or the fog of war and waiting for a good opportunity to find a kill or heavily zone out the opponent. Every 2 minutes you're going to want to go and check the nearest real rune spot so you can either secure the rune for yourself or your mid player. Runes are one of the ways you can create opportunities for yourself to get a kill on a lane. After you've checked the real rune, you want to either steal the enemy bounty rune or go for your own. If you're a hero with a stun that can contest the rune without dying, go for the enemy rune. This moment, when you are on top of your bounty rune, is where you become a roamer. You are kind of in between the lanes, and the enemy team is most likely going to lose vision over you once you are in your own jungle. After the fact, you can decide where you want to go next. How you enter the lane and execute your gank very much depends on your hero and where the lane equilibrium currently is. If you're an Earthshaker, you always want to come from the side where you can block off your enemy with a fissure. If you're on an Earth Spirit, it doesn't really matter where you come from as long as it's from the fog of war. Always be trying to abuse the fog of war from the trees and such to the fullest when you are roaming. If you show on the map at any time, you are instantly signaling to the enemy player that he should play more carefully. Understanding the hero you are playing and knowing what your entry point is, as well as how the gank needs to be executed in order for it to work, are quite different for a lot of heroes. In the past, the mid lane in Dota 2 used to not be quite as balanced and mirrored as it is right now. It used to be better, for example, to play Pudge on Radiant, because the trees next to the tower give you a good spot to hit a hook that's going to drag the enemy closer to your mid hero. It used to be pretty hard to successfully gank someone with Pudge if you were playing on the dire side, since all of the points from which you can hit a hook are usually super far away from where your mid hero is going to be standing. In the future, as the game develops and the map keeps on changing, there might be scenarios like this that you should be looking out for. The nighttime cycle in Dota is another important thing that should be mentioned in this guide. The first night cycle of the game is when the roamer really shines. Remember that almost every hero on the map, with very few exceptions like Slack or Luna, have their vision cut in half during the night. The first time night occurs is from minute 4 to minute 8, and this is the time that you really want to give it all you've got. When heroes have reduced vision, you can move a lot closer to them without them seeing you, so you can generally set up a lot more kills. This is the advantage you have because you are not actually going to be pushing a lane or anything. which means that the enemy team is not going to have any vision on you unless they have a ward. And while you are virtually invisible, you are going to see exactly where their cores are farming on the lanes. During the night is also a good time to place some deeper wards around the map, since you are probably not going to be seen by enemy heroes, and most of the wards that are placed at the start of the game are going to be running out soon. Basically, the night cycle is not only a benefit to Night Stalker, but every roaming hero in the game. Good roaming heroes are heroes that usually have a good level 1 spell that is usually a stun or a slow, with some damage that can create good kill opportunities. Earthshaker is a great roamer because he makes it a nightmare for the offlaner to position himself on the lane, because he can get blocked, and the long range of the stun of Fisher can also set up kills on any other lane as well. Sand King has a really good stun at level 1, which is a bit hard to get in range to use, but that's why people start him off with boots. At level 2 he can choose 30% slow on attack, or get Sandstorm so he can farm the jungle camps in between ganks. Earth Spirit is really good because he can roll on top of you from the fog at any point, and the damage and slow from his rolling boulder along with an orb of venom making amazing at chasing down enemies or simply harassing mid-heroes. Invis heroes like Bounty Hunter and Riki are another interesting type of roaming hero, as they can force the enemy team to buy detection so they don't straight up lose their lanes. These heroes make you paranoid as they don't even need to utilize the Fog of War before getting on top of you. Having invisibility at level 1 is pretty strong, and you can also use it to your advantage to place deeper wards without being seen or without having to smoke. There are a lot of roaming heroes, in short, that are almost always going to be viable, so you can find the ones that suit you, the ones that you enjoy the most, and begin practicing them. So we do hope that this guide helped you understand what roaming as a concept is, and why it is good. And we also hope that you go and play some Dota, because if you start playing in a way that helps you understand matchups and laning, you're going to become a sick support and a great roamer. We do hope that you enjoyed this video and that you learned something. Drop a comment down below, and we'll see all you guys in the next one.